can hear you.
You can hear me? Okay, great. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and they're going to start off by saying, I was born a baby, and they're going to go from there. Okay? Now, quickly, we'll do 30 seconds, then we're going to jump into this topic.
Great. So, hi, everyone. My name's Will North. I'm the CISO for a company called MHR, and MHR is a software and services company focusing on HR, payroll, and finance.
Hi, my name is Chintan. I'm a threat and vulnerability manager for Marks & Spencer. I try to manage vulnerabilities and not let vulnerabilities manage me.
Very good. I'm Rich. I'm the Chief Risk Technology Officer here for Qualys, and I'm super excited to ask you this first question, and I think this is a question for all of you. What vulnerability management program isn't a risk-based program, and what's the alternative? What is the alternative? Is there an alternative to a risk-based vulnerability?
I guess just an old school one where you're just using CVSS, and you've got thousands and thousands or tens of thousands of vulnerabilities, and you're just not prioritizing them. I guess that's not a risk-based approach. An element of risk, but...
You have a controversial answer to that?
No, I totally agree. So I think RBVM for me is like you add a little bit of context in each and every stage of the VM lifecycle, right from the asset inventory to prioritization, scanning, and everything. And the goal is not to fix everything, just manage the risk in the most efficient way.
Okay, all right. So what would I see occur? By the way, this is not stump the chump, right? So don't please. I told them, by the way, this is training for all of you. If you don't get the question you want, just answer the question you wish you had, okay? So,
like a politician.
Yeah, exactly. So what would I see occurring that would let me know, as like, let's say I'm the CISO, right? Or someone scary. How would I know that you were taking a risk-based approach? Like where I'd be able to turn to the CFO and say, see, we're taking a risk-based approach. What would I see occurring specifically?
Right, so I think we need to understand the requirement for the risk space, and we have like three audience, strategic, operational, and technical. So for CISO, I would give them the benefits and side-by-side comparison that what we are doing now, and if we move to the risk space, then what we can do extra, and how it's gonna reduce your stuff and everything. So I think that providing them with that context, I think they will understand what is the overall risk posture for the organization from external to internal. I think that is something which is valuable.
Okay.
So I think the technology teams for us, they would really be able to tell us if we're using a risk-based approach. Because normally, many years ago, we'd go, right, you got 10,000 vulnerabilities, fix them. And they go, oh, I can't do that. But now we are doing more of a risk-based approach, looking at Qualys real-time threat indicators and the true risk score. We can actually say, you've got 10,000, but just do these 5. And they say, oh, God, thank you. You've really saved us a lot of time. So they really see the benefit of a risk-based program. So I think if you want to know if you're doing it, ask your technology teams.
Okay. So I'll translate that. He knows, you're able to know it's working because they'll go out for beers with you again.
Yes,
right,
yeah,
exactly.
Maybe,
right.
Maybe, yeah.
So when you're looking at risk-based vulnerabilities, how does that correlate to actual assets? Now, I've heard a lot of discussion about assets. I'll just share with you, an asset is a construct. I mean, as technicians, oftentimes we'll think it's a workload, right? We'll think maybe it's a container, or maybe it's a server, or, whatever it might be. But the reality is, I think an asset it's really a view into actual business value, right? So how do you apply, so you have the risk-based approach, there's threats out there, we know that there are bad guys firing angry packets at this, and it's led to some compromise, so that vulnerability is high risk, we should take care of it. Maybe we look at external versus internal, but what about some concept of business value? How does that play into your prioritization of risk? Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah. So I think the question is around how do we look at prioritization of assets as well as the vulnerabilities?
Right, to help further prioritize operational activity.
Yeah. So I think we probably do what everyone else does, internal versus external, incredibly easy to do, do that on day one. But I don't think we probably do it as well as we could do. I think there's another layer of things that are potentially publicly facing, but they can't be scanned externally. So there might be something with a public IP with only 443 open, but then there's some third-party library on there that actually could be exploited. So we're trying to go through there's this perimeter layer, then we're trying to understand every service and bit of software on the perimeter internally. And then we pretty much treat everything in the back end as the same priority, which probably isn't the best way to do it. It's always a worry that, someone gave me an example today of about a receptionist laptop isn't as high risk as maybe a customer database. But actually, it's probably a lot easier to get onto that, and then you could pivot and you can get credentials. And so I'm probably getting in the kind of the CISO realm of just worrying about everything, which probably isn't the right place to go. And we probably need to do more prioritization within our internal assets and try and go out on a limb and say, look, receptionist laptop, yes, it could be compromised, but it isn't as important. Let's make sure we do the other areas first. But
so I'm going to drill in that a little bit, and then you can answer the question that you hoped I asked you, right?
Yeah.
All right. So have you gone through a process? Let's look at a loss case like business. There's different things. There's breach, data breach, if you have regulated data. There's business disruption, right? There's a lot of different loss cases. So let's just talk about business disruption. Have you started a process where you look at looking at a bigger level assets, like, so if you're dealing with a business unit stakeholder, maybe they run a region, they run a business unit, what have you, where if that asset or set of assets were to go offline for some amount of time, it would cause business disruption that would be considered to be material impact, like financial impact. Have you gone through a process of doing that as of yet? Don't feel bad if you haven't, but I'm just curious, have either of you started doing that?
Yeah, so totally, we look into that. So basically, from asset context, like external to internal, I totally agree. And if you go one step beyond, then you can look at the layer defense model and then see what is on the perimeter versus networking versus internal and data. So when we talk about the business disruption and everything, we can map it to MITRE framework where they have everything in terms of if attackers breach this, what would be the last impact, whether it's a business disruption or data loss or ransomware or something. So we do that through two ways. One is external to internal, what are your assets and prioritize. The second, every company knows their crown jewel assets, whether they are like PCI assets or the crown jewel assets, so how you protect those assets and what are the boundaries around those assets. So I think that's the key.
That's exactly right. So for example, let's say you work for a manufacturing company and the CFO just told you, by the way, our various ERP systems, let's say a couple are SaaS, a couple are on-prem, if any of them went down, were business disrupted, this would be millions of, true story by the way, this would be millions of dollars a day in losses. Is that the level which you're going to, where you work with a stakeholder, you understand their key systems, and what the plausible range of financial impacts might be? Is that something that you guys are doing yet to inform your remediation?
We've certainly looked at cyber risk quantification.
Okay.
Understanding the worst case scenario of the financial impact, regulatory, etc. And also kind of mapping that with other areas as well. Okay. But some of our crown jewels and the worst, the most important assets, actually they're the ones that are protected the most. We have a completely segregated customer environment. When we do pen tests, we even find it hard to get into the environment ourselves. Right. So actually, it's probably highly unlikely one of those is going to be exploited. Right. Not running Windows, running a flavor of Linux. But actually, again, the receptionist laptop, they're off on the internet, doing all sorts of things, sits on a user network. Actually, that's probably higher risk for an exploit to be, a vulnerability to be exploited, and then to start moving laterally somewhere else. So I think it's quite hard to prioritize your business assets. Do you do it kind of based on the attack vector and the likelihood of it being attacked, or the priority? And actually, all of our custom data is sitting, nice protected that shouldn't be able to be exploited. So that's why we find it so tricky to prioritize the internal assets.
So for example, userland, right? In that environment where you have users with portable assets or what have you.
Which is going to be breached at some point.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you just consider that as one large macro business asset then, in the way you treat it?
Yes, we have a completely separate user corporate network versus our customer network and cloud systems.
Okay. So it is a macro asset. But okay. All right.
Yeah, I think cyber risk quantification is a new thing, but also going to be mandatory in future. The one thing that I find interesting is I have seen a couple of products in the cyber risk quantification. The way they define the dollar value impact is totally different to other vendor and other vendor. Now, how business knows their dollar value impact is also different. Plus, if you are penalized, then what government is going to enforce as a dollar value impact is totally different in terms of the breaches and all. So I think that translation from threat to risk to dollar value impact is a key, and someone needs to find a proper breach. And I think only business people will understand who are working in those companies.
You're tempting me to start talking about that, but I'm controlling myself because this is my favorite topic. But you both have active cyber risk, I'm so tempted, but you both have active cyber risk quantification programs.
So we moved into that area. It's so complex.
Yeah.
I would say it's nearly impossible to do properly. We started looking at attack path mapping and probabilities of stages of attack and control mitigation to then try and work. It's easy to work out your final sum, right? If I lose 1,000 records of data, it's going to cost X. But then to try and put the probability of losing that, we have decided to just look at our 10 most likely attack paths and do cyber risk quantification on that. And I believe that's where the industry's going now. You can't quantify everything. As like Chintan said, there's lots of tools that say they do it, but I don't believe a lot of them how they do it.
How many of you think it's highly impossible or really not plausible to determine the likelihood of loss from cyber? One person? One brave soul. All right.
I'll swap seats.
2? Okay, 2, 3, more, 4? 5. If it was later in the day, we'd had a few pints, I think there'd be more hands. Okay. Well, for those of you particularly raising your hands, how many think that you are being breached and having financial payout from insurance 100% of the time, all the time? Of course, you're all going to say no, right? We know it's more than 0. Do you know that the likelihood of this? So I've done surveys with over several hundred CISOs. I was the chief risk officer for a mid-market cyber insurance company. The likelihood of you having ransomware, where you actually, it's material and you exercise insurance, hovers somewhere between 1 and 2%. It's pretty low. It might even be a little lower. You might think, well, that sounds like very low.
Brilliant. Yeah, we just leave, go home now.
Well, this is a very low number. There's just hundreds of thousands of companies out there, so we hear about it a lot, right? So it can be measured generally. We know something. We can actually apply that. The important thing, though, is that what that number means in relationship to what you stand to lose. So when you start looking at a small likelihood, and there's several of them, by the way, that was just ransomware. Business email compromise, wire fraud, the losses globally are larger for that than ransomware. You probably already knew that, right? Fraud's really growing as we think about the advent of AI and additional techniques for spoofing. You also saw the thing with Hong Kong, right? They created the digital twin of the CFO and got the team to wire fraud, to wire 25 million out, right? We'll see more of that, but it's what you stand to lose. So let's get back then to vulnerability management then. So what I'm hearing, to summarize, is that you first of all are prioritizing external versus internal, which I think everyone would do. Beyond that, you, like internally, when it comes to really your laptops and all that, you're treating all of that like one big macro asset, distinct from what might be a internet-facing business application, things like that, okay? All right, so let's talk about friction in terms of remediation. How is it that how do you work, you mentioned a little bit of that, but I want to hear more about what's that workflow like when you're getting in, hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not more vulnerabilities. How are you working that with the people who are actually responsible for remediation? Tell me about that process.
Right, so first of all, I think what I consider VM team for others is like a trouble seeker team. So I want to change that image. So when we go and talk to the remediation team, I don't want them to feel like a trouble seeker team. So we just want to tell them we are one team, just here to help you. We're going to help you with the prioritization, blah, blah, blah. Now, what we do is like we bucket based on our operations. So we have like separate, Windows, Linux, cloud, networking team, and infra team and on-prem. So what we do, like we have recorded sessions for them. We are providing tailored, customized reporting for them and tell them this is like a self-serving dashboard for you. So don't manage spreadsheets. You just come here, look at your vulnerabilities. We go on a weekly call. We prioritize, we bucket for you and apply the 80-20 rule where you do the 20% of the work and you fix the 80% of the stuff rather than going through each and every vulnerability one by one. So this is how we work with them. And I think the good part for the remediation team, when you talk about the friction, is you give them incentives. So if they're doing good work, you just give them thank you and tell them, oh, I have talked to CISO and I think he's also happy with the work. And I think they really get motivated. So I think these small things really matter.
Yeah, I think that's really true. So we have separate Qualys dashboards for each of the teams, as you've mentioned. We sit down with them weekly and kind of help, do this one and this will be the best, do this one. And I think you're right about the kind of incentivizing. It sounds a little bit funny, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You're kind of congratulating children, but I think sometimes you have kind of key people in each of the teams, and then they kind of get the bit between their teeth, and they're like, actually kind of smashing the vulnerabilities down, and yeah, we can report it, and then report it in board packs and things like that. So you've got to try and get them on board. But I think vulnerability management is a nightmare. The technology teams never have enough time. They're all delivering new products. For our customers, we have to have downtime if we're deploying new patches. The technology teams never want to go to the latest release of anything. They want to do kind of N-1, which immediately means you've got vulnerabilities there. So I think it's a struggle. I think we try and spoon feed them, but it's always difficult. And they'll patch 90% of vulnerabilities from Patch Tuesday, but this one needs a registry change. We can't do that one. And 90% probably sounds good, but then over 10 years, and they're only doing 90% every month, you start building up this kind of legacy.
Tech debt.
Yeah.
So you are accountable to the assessment. You're accountable to the information security management policy. That's particularly as a CISO, that's your job. As running vulnerability management, that's a huge part of that. And again, the CTO and CIO and et cetera, they are responsible for executing change. You're responsible for implementing the policy. They're responsible, this is very ISO talk, by the way, they're responsible for executing the change.
Which I think sometimes they get confused that.
They do. I do sometimes. But what are you seeing in your own experience about the shift to where security is leaning in a little bit more to the responsibility side? So for example, this is a shameless plug. Obviously, we do patching, right? That's a big thing. That at the time, as Sumedh mentioned, that was not seen as like, well, you're a security team, you're a security company, you're offering patching. Security teams will never get to do that yet. We've millions and millions of patches been pushed. You see this on the cloud native side as well with auto PRs. This is just stuff with cloud native development. What are you seeing in your environment where the acceptance or even expectation that you're actually either providing the direct solution for remediation and or at least really queuing it up so that they maybe just have to review and then push and go?
Right. So I think it starts from the policy. When we talk about the responsibilities, we have separate buckets for like AppSec team, remediation team, asset owners, and all. So we have defined very clear responsibilities what it should be. So go through the policy and just make sure you are compliant with that. Now, a lot of vendors would also provide automated patch management solutions and everything. And I had a talk with multiple CISOs, and what they tend to believe is if vulnerability management team is going to push one button and that's going to fix vulnerability, they're not going to be responsible for their assets. So we need to have a shift in the mindset that they own the assets, they know what the best tools and code and everything is there. They should be responsible for patching and all. And I think VM team is more of an assurance team, which just keeps reminding them that you need to do your job. So I think that's how it works. So even though there are like patch management solution, but that's not going to be fully operational in the companies because of this shift in the mindset. We want people to make them responsible for their assets.
I completely agree with that. Kind of the vulnerability management team being the assurance team. I'm rightly or wrongly completely against the security team deploying patches. Excuse me. I want my team to be experts in kind of what's being exploited. Is it an easy exploit? Is it what threat groups are out there? All the kind of the real-time threat indicators. And if they start applying patches, and then the user rings up and says, "Oh, my Adobe's broken," it will completely. My team aren't experts in change management and ITIL. Right. They're experts. What could be exploited? How can it be exploited? Is it being exploited? How can we mitigate it? And the second they start doing anything, they'll get pulled into day-to-day operations and completely sucked away from anything in it. An incredibly boring process as well. So I'd be very against the security team applying any patches.
Because it's fun to argue on stage. Do you mind if we do a little bit of that? So if I were the CFO, and I'd say, okay, in the long run, which one costs more? We have financial headwinds. If there was some way to, by the way, it could be patching, it could be auto PR from a GitOps perspective, whatever. If there's something that's going to reduce, and again, I know that you can create inadvertent business disruption with patching. I mean, that's what you're talking about, right? And then you're talking about the burden of having people who maybe are not expert, they're going to be called in to rescue you, right? That's the worst case scenario, by the way. But wouldn't the CFO say, well, okay, what's going to reduce my overall overhead? If you have a way to reduce the overall costs, the burden to the business that we can reinvest in the business, and this takes into consideration the occasional oopsie, right? It should be occasional. I mean, hopefully you have good fidelity information to realize that this patch is not going to destroy things, and hopefully, but occasionally you'll have an oopsie. Wouldn't you want to go with the most operationally, economically efficient approach?
I agree with the automation of application of patches. I agree with the applying them, but I think it shouldn't be the security team's responsibility. So we have, our IT team have all those automated tools. So let's say Qualys has the patching remediation element. that should be managed by the IT team.
Okay.
So completely agree with automated remediation.
So you can hand them the gun, but they have to pull the trigger.
Yes, exactly. You know, and the people patching are probably in the IT team, you know, half the salary of the people trying to kind of identify these vulnerabilities, threat intelligence people. So I think overall, it's not as good value getting, you know, some expensive threat intelligence person trying to patch.
Yeah, I think that's a horrible waste of time too, for sure.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Yeah, I think I totally agree, but you look at my position, I'm a manager, and I work with the head of security. He works for CISO, and CISO works for like CTO, CFO. So if that has been the drive from the top to bottom, obviously CFO and CISO would align, and CISO and head of security would align. So we are just the executor, whether they want the risk reduction by increasing a little bit of cost in the automated patch management, or they want shift in the mindset and go slowly and take people responsibility, because you may invest in one tool and let's say we just have SOPs around those tools, and tomorrow that tool is getting changed. Now it would be very hard for people to make them responsible in the future if this tool is gone away because of costing or support or some other reason. So I think there has to be a fine balance from top to bottom management.
Yeah. So one of the big changes we saw with the whole DevOps thing, you're probably all aware of this, but like the Netflix model, you built it, you own it, and you're the engineer. You mean you're the full stack engineer, you're the SRE, you're the DevOps person, you're the developer, you're the service owner. You're going to get the pager, which creates a need for being able to do good design, but also have great tooling. They would come in and do, you know, be it for your infrastructure as code or patching for the OS level. So the idea was that I was going to drive operational and economic efficiency, but Netflix has more money than, you know, who knows who. But I'm wondering, is that you don't ever see that sort of approach coming where you would see more of both the vulnerability and remediation being owned by the actual service owner?
Right, so it depends on how we facilitate the data, because a lot of big companies would have their own vulnerability management team and their own AppSec team. Now, AppSec team would also have like CSPM tools, SAST, IAC, and they would also produce the vulnerabilities, while VM team also, you know, uses Qualys and other products, and they would also produce the vulnerabilities. So how these two are segregated, whether VM focuses more on infra and AppSec focuses more on the code base, and if yes, then how do you facilitate this data? Because at the same time, you don't want both the teams and some other, let's say, pen testing and red teaming team, you know, draft so many emails to the remediation team and fix, and they don't know what to prioritize. So I think anything related to vulnerability, it has to come to one bucket and then prioritize and then give it to them. So in terms of the owning, yes, but because of the lack of expertise, they wouldn't know how to find vulnerabilities. They don't have the right access of tools and everything. And because we own the tools, we just facilitate the data and make them responsible for fixing.
I partially agree with that.
Last question?
I completely agree with the service owner should be responsible for patching. So we have a policy that says, yeah, if you built it, you own it, you should be monitoring third-party feeds, etc. And all we do is provide assurance of the absolute critical ones. Because it's the business owners and the technology owners, they're going to know, okay, right, we found a vulnerability in a third-party library.
Right.
So we had a Docker container that was deployed yesterday for development. It had 102 vulnerabilities in it.
Right.
You know, we have no idea if those libraries are being used,
Right.
if we know if their functionality is being used. We know how bad it is, potentially, but we don't know if it's used. So I think it should be the owner's responsibility.
Yeah.
And if, I don't want them just hanging around and saying, oh, I didn't patch it because you didn't tell me to patch it.
Right.
You know, and there's thousands of assets, you know, thousands of different pieces of technology all around the business. You know, they can't wait for my team to go and say, oh, we patched this one, this one, this one. They need to patch everything.
Right.
And we will help them prioritize that patching.
Right.
And then, you know, absolutely jump on it if there's some critical vulnerability.
So I'm going to just summarize as opposed to ask another question, if that's okay. Thank you, this is great. What I'm hearing is that we do need to enable the service owners, I'm using that as a generalized term, the technology owner. They are responsible for implementing or executing change. But you guys, we're using the word prioritization. Increasingly, I think what our job is risk management. Call it prioritization, but understanding the business impact. High level, what's the objective of the business, and what is going to stand in the way of them fulfilling their mission? How do we prioritize then protecting those assets that would plausibly lead to that loss? That is a highly specialized skill set, I think. I believe that this is going to be the future of where vulnerability management really goes. More generally, call it cybersecurity risk management. It is about understanding what the risk is. That's financial, compliance, being able to quantify that, understand the likelihood reasonably. And it is going to be increasingly upon those people who are building technology, and you're part of the enablement, for them to be able to auto patch, so to speak, to be, be it auto PR, be it patching. I think this is the direction, and that where we are going to become more is cybersecurity risk management professionals more generally. That job will never end. All right, I have no more questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.